What a great day in Boston. It's working. Testing? Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the second meeting of the Silver Line Gateway Alternative Analysis. We're going to have T-shirts made up. It'll have that on that. Maybe on the back, too. I'm Jay Ashman, City Manager here in Chelsea. Thank you all for coming. We're very pleased to see another great turnout. There's been a lot of interest in our community about this project, and I believe rightly so. Before we get started, I want to thank Chelsea Cable TV. This is being televised live on Chelsea Cable TV and will be replayed. So if you have friends and neighbors who couldn't be here tonight, please let them know that this will be on television and they can watch that. I am very appreciative of the individuals and the residents, the community groups that are here that are representing interests of themselves and the groups that they coalesce around. So thank you for being here. I want to thank members of the City Council who are here, Joe Perlatonda and Giovanni Recupero, right on cue. Giovanni walked in. Thank you for being here. Other City Councilors are out at other events tonight. There's a National Honor Society event. Paula Barton is here as well. Paula, thank you for being here. Former Councilor Richie Moronsky. Anyone else I should introduce? I should introduce everybody. There's other events in the community tonight going on, so several councilors are down to the National Honor Society event, and there's an event for Bunk Hill Community College as well as the National Honor Society event. So we're all around, but I'm here. John DePriest from our staff is here, the Planning and Development staff, and I thank John and that staff for all their efforts. And I'm especially appreciative of the Mass DOT and their consultants who are here to, again, walk us through where they've been over the last couple of weeks or so, a couple of months, I should say, and to talk to us about what some of the perspectives are that they have. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott Hamway. I will, as Scott comes up, I will thank Scott specifically. We had in this very chamber last Wednesday, Student Government Day, and Scott was kind enough to come over during the daytime hours to meet with 40 students who were here as part of Student Government Day to walk them through this proposal and to talk to them about what their opinions are about the prospects. Scott also talked a little bit about the job of a planner in the transportation circle. So Scott, thank you for doing that as well. So here's Scott.
Thanks, Jay. You're welcome. Any opportunity to get out of the office is a good one. Appreciate it. My name is Scott Hamway. I'm with the Office of Transportation Planning at MassDOT. Before we get started, I just want to let folks know if anybody needs Spanish language translation, we do have that available tonight. Just see Carmen over in the corner, and I'll try to talk a little bit slower than I did last time because I think I made Carmen's life pretty tough at the last meeting. Just quickly want to thank Ned Codd from MassDOT and Heather Hume from the MBTA who are joining me today. And just quickly introduce members of our consultant team that are supporting us. From AECOM, we have Jay Doyle, who's our project manager, Jeff Maxtudis, who's doing the traffic analysis, Will Calvez doing the transit analysis, and Isaac Almy also from AECOM, and then from Regina Villa and Associates helping us out with public outreach, civic engagement. We have Nancy Farrell, and Carrie Chase is somewhere around. Oh, there she is in the back. Thanks, Carrie. So want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This is our second meeting. We had a really great first meeting, and we're really excited about tonight's meeting because what we're going to look to get from all of you is some input on which alternatives we want to advance through a more sort of rigorous analysis. The team has been working over the past couple months identifying a range of potential alternatives for how we might extend Silver Line service into Chelsea and East Boston, and coming out of this meeting pretty quickly, we're going to want to try to winnow that list down to 3 alternatives. So that's the purpose of today's meeting. For those who for whom this might be the first time coming to one of our meetings or learning about the project, the overall goal really is just to It's to extend Silver Line service, the service that's currently operating in South Boston and South Station, extend that into East Boston and beyond to Chelsea in a way that just enhances the mobility of folks living in these communities, and also to help facilitate some economic development. It's a project that we have the Secretary of Transportation is a strong proponent of, as is the General Manager of the MBTA. It's an opportunity to take advantage of some of the recent public investments we've made. There are some constraints. Certainly, if you follow the news, you're aware that there's been an ongoing transportation funding debate at the State House, and depending on how that plays out, that could affect sort of the timeline for this project. But if you look at the up at the screen there, you see our schedule, and this is our second round of public meetings, and the goal is to have 2 more before we wrap up the project in September with a recommended alternative. Yep, I'm sorry. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks. This slide just, again, for those who are new to the process, this shows you the study area corridor with South Station down here, existing Silver Line service coming through South Boston to Logan Airport. And what we're looking to do is extend that through Airport Station over here into Chelsea, where we're going to be looking at both on-street alignments that take advantage of the local street network, but also sort of dedicated busway alignments that would use former railroad right-of-way. So again, we want to get your input today on what alternatives you'd like to see us analyze further. For South Boston and East Boston, a lot of our decisions are essentially already made for us, so I'll kind of quickly take you through what this service would look like in those 2 communities, and then you'll see that most of our question marks as far as alignments are over here in Chelsea. What the Silver Line does today is it comes from South Station through a dedicated tunnel that was built sort of in the Big Dig era, serves a subway station at Courthouse by the federal courthouse, has another subway station at World Trade Center that serves the Convention Center in South Boston, World Trade Center, and a lot of the new development that's happening. And then it basically comes to the surface, serves a station at Silver Line Way, and then kind of meanders its way around the road there, and then enters the Ted Williams Tunnel to continue its trip over to Logan Airport to serve the terminals, and then does sort of the reverse of that in the inbound direction. In East Boston, rather than serve the terminals as the current Silver Line service does, we would take advantage of the airport roadway system and come over to a new connection with Airport Station on the Blue Line. So Airport Station, which was rebuilt several years ago, was rebuilt in a way that really provides much better access to the local East Boston community. So today, if you live in East Boston and you want to take the Silver Line, it's very challenging to get over to the airport terminals and access it. This would allow folks that live within the walking distance of Airport Station, in these areas here, Eagle Hill, Day Square. It would allow those folks to get to Airport Station and have a very quick trip over into the Seaport district. After Airport Station, we would take advantage of a new facility that opened several months ago that Massport constructed, which is the Coughlin Bypass Road. That's a dedicated freight and transit facility that was designed to take truck traffic off of local streets in Day Square. So that would allow us to sort of quickly get over to the new Chelsea Street Bridge and come into Chelsea, where again, that's where a lot of our question marks are for the project, and we want to get your input. So I'm going to first run you through a series of alternatives and options for what we're calling the busway alternative. So these are alternatives that primarily make use of that unused railroad right-of-way that starts over by Eastern Avenue by the Chelsea Street Bridge and then kind of wraps its way around the back of Bellingham Hill to Chelsea Commuter Rail Station. And then after we go through a number of alternatives for the busway, we'll then look at the on-street alternatives afterwards. So this is our sort of full build busway alternative that makes the most use of that railroad right of way. It comes across the Chelsea Street Bridge and then How we're showing it here is we're showing it entering the unused railroad right-of-way through the turnaround loop at the Massport Logan employee parking garage. So the Silver Line buses would come across Eastern Avenue, turn right into that busway, and then enter the railroad right-of-way behind the garage, and then continue along behind the Box District redevelopment on Garish Avenue, Atlas Lofts, underneath the Broadway Bridge and Washington Avenue bridges, past the commuter rail station, and then under Route 1, and then ultimately over to Market Basket and the Mystic Mall, where the service would have a turnaround loop at the end. And initially how we're envisioning it is that we'd have maybe 4 stations on this alignment. So you'd have a station in the vicinity of the Logan employee garage. You'd have a second station in the vicinity of where Highland Street meets the right-of-way, kind of in that Box District redevelopment area. A third station over at the commuter rail station, which would allow for transfers for folks coming in from the north to access the service. And then a final station over here, kind of behind Market Basket, that would allow folks to access both those uses at the Mystic Mall site and also other uses like the MGH facility on Everett Avenue. So that's our kind of full build of the busway. But there's a lot of question marks and a lot of places where we may need to kind of modify that. I'll first kind of walk us through some of those options over by the Logan Airport employee garage. What we're showing here is kind of what we think is probably the ideal station location, and this would be having a station located, if not exactly where this shows it, somewhere adjacent to the garage. The garage is already it's a very active site. It's well lit. There's a lot of activity there, and we think having a station in the vicinity of the garage that makes a lot of sense. It also makes it easy for folks to come up Central Avenue from the residential neighborhood and access the service there. However, that's private property. It's not MassDOT property at that location, so we need to coordinate with the private property owner there. We've had some initial conversations. Also, the Massport employee shuttle operation there is very important, and we certainly don't want to do anything that's going to make it harder for Logan Airport to get their employees over to their facility. So because of those issues, we've looked at a couple alternatives. The first would be to slide that station a little bit further to the north, because once you get it up past this point, now you're in MassDOT controlled right-of-way. So it may be a little bit easier to build a station there because it's on our property. However, it's a little bit removed from the Central Avenue and the sort of existing center of activity over there. So that's a concern to kind of keep in mind there. In the event that it's simply not possible to go through the private property at the Logan Airport employee garage, there's a couple other ways we could still get over and access the right-of-way. One would involve the Silver Line making a right turn on Eastern Avenue after coming over the Chelsea Street Bridge, making a right, and then making that first left onto Cottage Street, and then you could just make that right turn right onto the railroad right-of-way. That's a location where the railroad tracks used to cross the street right at grade, so it'd be an easy turn there. Another alternative would be to go simply a block further to the north before you make that turn and turn onto Bellingham Street. Bellingham Street, you've got a difference in grade from where the street is to where the old railroad right-of-way is. So in order to do this, we just need to, it's not really shown here, but we need to, obviously ramp, have a ramp to get down to the right-of-way. So one thing to point out about both of those options is that we think if we do either of those options, it probably doesn't make sense, at least in the near term, to have a station here, because a station on Eastern Avenue would just maybe create some challenges with pedestrian access getting across Eastern Avenue to access it. So it may make sense to not stop in this side of town if we're following Eastern Avenue. So the next area that we'll focus in on is in downtown Chelsea. And again, we're envisioning the area behind the Box District redevelopment as being a good place to have a station. This is not suggesting a specific location, but just it's meant to represent that we think a station somewhere in the vicinity of Highland makes sense. The service would then cross under the two bridges and then have that sort of shared station with the commuter rail station at Chelsea. So that's before continuing on to Mystic Mall. One of the things that we have thought, from the outset was that a busway alternative might be better in terms of speed and kind of staying out of traffic, but that it doesn't get as close to where people are currently using the bus service. So that was always viewed as kind of one of the drawbacks of a busway alternative. So what we did was we looked at a variation of the busway that instead of going all the way over to Mystic Mall on the railroad right-of-way, it would instead try to leave the right-of-way and get into Bellingham Square so that you're serving the kind of heart, of the downtown community. And it's a challenging move, but it's one that the team believes is doable. It basically involves coming under the Broadway bridge, and then we would need to build a ramp structure to basically get up to that little stub end of Chestnut Street that's right over there past the fire station. There's a big enough of a grade differential there that it wouldn't be an easy move, but it's something that we think we could do. And then the Silver Line would be able to leave the busway, circle Bellingham Square and serve Bellingham Square, and then go back into the right of way and head back into South Boston and East Boston. So that's an option. It does have some not insignificant impacts. We'd probably need to remove parking from that block of Chestnut Street. It's never easy to remove on-street parking, but that's probably what would need to happen there in order to make this work. We'd need to obviously have conversations with the fire department about whether that's a use that causes problems for them. But that's another thing that we've looked at, and we'd like to get your feedback on whether that's something that's worth pursuing. And then taking us to the end of the busway, over in the Mystic Mall area, the way we're envisioning it is coming across Spruce and Everett Avenue in the right-of-way, and then having a station, both an inbound and an outbound station, the end of the line, kind of right behind that little, the smaller side parking lot that sort of sits between Market Basket and Everett Avenue. So it'd be off to the side there. So that gives you pretty good access for people trying to get to Market Basket or other other jobs in the area. And then it's also good because it allows us to then come down and turn the buses around in that there's that sort of grassy area on the other side of the Market Basket behind it. Again, that's private property. We've had initial conversations with the DeMoulas folks who own the property. That's something where we're going to have to continue having conversations with them, but it gives us the potential to have a good layover spot for our drivers, and it allows us to easily turn the service around and then come back through and serve the inbound trip. If that becomes unworkable for whatever reason, or if people feel like that's not the best location to have a station, there's a couple other things we could do. One would involve us not crossing Everett Avenue at all. So basically, when you get to Spruce Street, kind of behind the MGH facility, we could leave the railroad right-of-way, turn left on Spruce Street, have a new station, end-of-the-line station right there on Spruce, on the side of the MGH facility, and then just make a series of right-hand turns onto Everett and then back into the busway. So that would save us a little bit of construction costs extending the busway behind Market Basket. We wouldn't have to touch private property to the extent that we would with the other alternative, and it eliminates the need to cross Everett Avenue. And then a final option down at this end of the busway alternative is basically coming across Everett Avenue, and then instead of continuing behind Market Basket, just pulling out of the right-of-way and then serving that curb where the taxis pick up today at Market Basket, and the buses have a stop right there for the Silver Line, and then have it kind of make its way back through that parking lot to get onto the right-of-way. So those are that's sort of the family of busway alternatives, and I think we could either, I mean, I'm happy if somebody has a clarifying question on the busway alternatives, that we could take that now, or I could take us through the on-street alternatives, and we could do all the questions at the end. Sir?
There's a lot of traffic on Everett Avenue. The bus is going to cause the gate to close with all the rails. It's going to be a bottleneck.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's the reason we looked at that option to not have to cross Everett Avenue, is that, you know, that if that's something that we hear a lot about, then that's definitely something we want to consider. If anyone has any questions about the alignment, you know, I could take them now. Otherwise, we could go right into the on-street alternatives, and then we could save the comments until the end. Councilor? So I think for that, for that development, I think we would view the commuter rail station as being the Silver Line would stop at the commuter rail station, and I think we would view that as being that would probably be the closest station for that redevelopment. You know, on this corridor, the right-of-way is actually, you know, it's wide enough. We think that there's very little property, if any, that would need to be taken kind of coming through here. The Commonwealth-owned right-of-way is fairly wide through there. So we don't think, for this busway alternative, other than maybe a few small, you know, slivers here and there, this is primarily Commonwealth-owned property. Again, the big exceptions being the Massport employee garage being a location where we obviously need to work with the property owner there, and then having any kind of turnaround facility at Market Basket that would require conversations with the private property owner. But that's, yep. Right, to have transfers there. Well, siting stations sort of right under bridges is not the sort of ideal condition for a variety of reasons, but certainly that's, you know, that's a good, having a station somewhere sort of between Broadway and Washington Ave is probably the best place as far as bus connections, certainly. The city and the developers over in the Box District have expressed an interest, you know, once this project moves forward, to try to have some kind of pedestrian connection that would come down from Broadway, kind of behind Garish Avenue. And that could serve as a way, you know, a fairly simple transfer for folks coming off the 116, 117. They could take this pedestrian connection down to the busway and to a station that's behind the Box District. You know, the 111, it's not an ideal transfer to kind of have to walk down 6th and get over to the commuter rail station, but that's probably what the transfer would look like, you know, at least in the near term. So, yeah, Councilor. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that on Spencer Road, we also have another large development. We are making a stop probably behind the Fox District. I'm thinking we could have a lot of walking paths so that the people who live on Spencer developments can also use that same access, and maybe people who live at Mill Creek condominium could have a walking access to use that same stop, because rather than increase the number of stops, because Central Avenue and Easton is very congested, especially since we have the new bridge in. I was told by Doc at Coughlin that it takes about 20 minutes up and 20 minutes down, which is at least 4 times the amount of time that it used to take before. So cars are now going up Cottage and up Bellingham. And that makes Bellingham and Cottage much more crowded than it's been the last couple of, since that bridge has been done. So we're going to be adding more congestion there, and I just want you to think about that in your plan.
And, thank you, Councilor. That might be a good segue to the on-street, because some of those comments, I think, are going to be relevant to the on-street alternatives that we talked about. But certainly, just on the Mill Creek condos point, I think that, you know, those 2 stations I showed earlier in the vicinity of the employee garage, I mean, it would seem like there would be opportunities there to provide a good, clean connection from Mill Creek over to that station. But let's jump over to the on-street alternatives. So, again, the goal of this alternative is to try to get into the heart of where the current transit demand is in Bellingham Square, downtown Chelsea, and just like I showed you a kind of initial base alternative for the busway, this is kind of our base alternative for the on-street alternative. And what it would do is it would come across Eastern Avenue and then just continue down Central Avenue to Hawthorn Street, make a right turn on Hawthorn, come into Bellingham Square, serve Bellingham Square station that's there today, and then it would loop behind City Hall and serve the inbound stop at Bellingham Square before following the one-way street pattern and then heading back out towards East Boston. So there are a number of, you see some labels up here. I'm going to kind of take you through what those refer to, but there's a number of on-street treatments that we would want to do if we did an on-street alternative in order to ensure that this service wouldn't get bogged down with some of the same reliability concerns that you see on the on the 111 or the 116 or 117 to try to give the bus preferential treatment where we can. Initially we went in thinking let's try to be as aggressive as we can with on-street bus accommodations, and but once we sort of started to really look at Central Avenue, we realized that just wasn't going to be feasible to be too aggressive. The street is it's only about 38 or 40 feet wide, so it's not a very wide street that you can easily put in a dedicated busway. In fact, in order to have dedicated bus lanes like we have in the South End in Roxbury on Washington Street, even to do that would require us to eliminate all of the on-street parking for the full length of Central Avenue. So that I've been in enough public meetings to know that's not a great thing to lead with. So what we did was we looked at, okay, the good news is that there's not typically a lot of congestion on Central Avenue, with the exception of the two ends of the street. That tends to be where the congestion is. The middle of the street tends to function pretty fine. Obviously when the bridge is up, it's a different story. But so what we did was we tried to focus on making targeted improvements at those congestion points. So this alternative, what we're showing here is imagine you're coming across the Chelsea Street Bridge and you're looking down Central Avenue. So today you've effectively got a couple lanes of traffic that are coming towards you to try to turn onto Eastern or get onto the bridge, and then another space for vehicles to turn onto Central. What we're proposing here to address that congestion issue is to basically dedicate a lane for buses for that final half block or block of Central Avenue. And that would also allow us to give a preferential signal to buses at the Eastern Avenue intersection. So this would allow the Silver Line buses, as well as the Massport employee buses, to kind of get into their own lane for that last 100 feet or so of Central Avenue, and then get ahead of the traffic to go over the bridge. So there's obviously impacts there because today you've got effectively two lanes there, making right turns, making lefts, going straight. So there's some impacts there, but that's what the initial proposal is at that end. Then, of course, at Highland Street, where we imagine we'd want to have a station, just like we have a station at Highland on the busway, you'd probably also want to have a station here to serve the local community. And whenever you have a station, you obviously need to take the parking away. And for the types of stations we're envisioning and the vehicles we're envisioning, the parking loss would probably be greater than it is today at the bus stops that you have out at that corner, serving the 112. But this is sort of what the cross section would look like. Here's the sidewalk, kind of doubling as the station, and here's this over-wide lane so that the bus could pull up. Traffic could still kind of squeeze by while the bus was stopped picking up folks. Then coming all the way to this end of Central at Hawthorn Street, by the Shirtlift School, that last block or two from Shawmut or Shirtlift, same thing. We'd look to basically create a lane for the buses to kind of get ahead of any congestion that's trying to get into the square, and we would do that. In order to do that here, we would have to take on-street parking on both sides of Central Avenue for whatever length of Central Avenue we thought was necessary, whether it be a block or 2 blocks. So it's a significant impact. but one we think would do a lot towards helping the bus stay on schedule and get into Chelsea downtown quicker. You had a question, sir?
I'm just wondering, I live in Military Condo, and like Mr. Bowden was saying, you know, it's tough enough now. When you do this, it's a great idea, but now that becomes Indianapolis. Now, Carter Street becomes Indianapolis now.
Oh, yes, okay.
Crazy the way they zoom up those streets. What can we do so they don't do something, zoom up the streets?
Right. Okay, so what you're saying, sir, is that if we're making any changes to kind of the capacity of Central Avenue for regular traffic, for non-transit traffic, then you're just going to push even more folks onto these side streets that really aren't designed to carry traffic. That's.
I'm wondering, would the speed bumps help at all?
You know, that's more of a municipal level question. Yeah, I would, you know, but I think maybe what I'll do is let me try to get through the rest of the on-street alignment, and then we could kind of dive into some of those detailed questions. But yeah. Okay, this is the last cross section I'll show you. So this, there are two other places on that on-street alternative where we think we could dedicate a lane to buses. The first is on Hawthorn, between Central Ave and Bellingham Square. So basically today you have two lanes of, this is what it looks like today. You have two lanes of two parking lanes, and then a kind of a very wide one-way lane. Sometimes it's two lanes, sometimes it functions as one lane, sometimes there's double parking. So what we're proposing to do there is eliminate parking on one side of the street. The way we're showing it here, it would be on the side of the street with the supermarket and the church and a couple other small businesses, to create a dedicated lane for buses, and it could also serve as a bicycle lane as well. And then you'd still have that one lane of through traffic, and you'd still be able to preserve the parking on the other side of Hawthorn Street. And then the other place where we had envisioned having a bus lane, so the solid yellow is bus lane on these maps. The other place we had envisioned it was right out here on Washington Avenue, although we think there's enough room there that you wouldn't need to impact on-street parking. You could just have a bus lane on the side for that one block of Washington. So that's the on-street alternative. The busway alternative extends all the way over to Mystic Avenue, or that was the goal of that alternative. We also wanted to see if there was a way, if we went with an on-street alternative, to also continue on and serve Mystic Mall and the redevelopment opportunities over there. And it's challenging because you have a lot of one-way streets. You have the street grid coming together at a kind of an awkward angle for buses to be able to make turns to head over there. And then you have a few streets that don't go all the way through under Route 1. But we are looking at a number of treatments that would allow us to maybe make a connection over to the mall. I won't take you kind of exhaustively through any of the potential routings because it kind of gets confusing even for me. But just some of the things we've considered. One is that block of 6th Street between Washington Avenue and the commuter rail station. It's one way coming towards Bellingham Square. We think there's enough room there to have. We think that we could get a contraflow lane there just for buses, so that buses only could travel in the sort of outbound direction on 6th Street to get over to either the commuter rail station or the railroad right-of-way, whatever move you're trying to make. But that's something we think we could do. There'd be a parking impact, of course. Another place to look at this would be at Arlington Street, over by Arthur's Deli and the Dunkin' Donuts, and that's a one-way street on that block. It would be creating another contraflow lane there for buses to be able to kind of go against the flow. And then, at least on this one section of Everett Avenue, we think there's sufficient width, sort of just south of where the intersection was recently reconstructed. We think there might be sufficient width there to have dedicated bus lanes for at least that short stretch of Everett Avenue. I've talked a lot about losing on-street parking, which is not, it's not a popular thing to do, but this just gives you a sense of the scale of what the parking impacts would be if we went with any of these on-street alternatives. Central Avenue, we'd be talking about 20, 22 parking spaces that we'd have to sacrifice. Hawthorn Street approaching Bellingham Square, there's about 24 parking spaces on that right side of Hawthorn that would be impacted. And then you see the parking impact on 6th Street as well. In order to do that contraflow lane, you're looking at about 16 spaces. One interesting finding thus far in the process is that, again, we've always kind of operated under this assumption that the railroad right-of-way would be faster, but that it wouldn't get to the heart of the residential community as well as the on-street alternative. And what the team did was they basically looked at what the sort of quarter-mile walk access for each of the stations on each of our alternatives looks like. And certainly the biggest number of residents within a quarter mile, you get that with the on-street alternative, but it's not dramatically more residents than you see under our busway alternatives. So the busway, even though it feels a little bit off the grid, the stations could be sited in such a way that you would still have fairly decent access, and then certainly. Having the busway come all the way over to Everett Avenue, it does give you access to a lot more jobs than an on-street alternative just focused on the downtown would. One question that always comes up is the bridge. So I think actually, Councillor, when we looked at this, I think we looked at the sort of the bridge logs over the past couple months, and I think what we're seeing is that the bridge is open for about 13, 14 minutes on average, as opposed to 20. But that's still a long time, and it probably feels like a half an hour, I'm sure. But that's a big problem, and even if we do all of these great things with the busway and with bus lanes on the street, that's obviously going to have an impact on reliability. It certainly impacts the reliability of the 116, 117. But there's a couple things we think we can do by coordinating with bridge operations and using customer information. One would be if we can just get a little bit advance notice, a couple minutes of when the bridge is going up. There's a couple things we could do. One is that the MBTA could short turn service that's on the East Boston side of the creek. So in other words, if you have an outbound trip heading to Chelsea, you're at Airport Station, the bridge is going up. It doesn't make sense for that bus to just go over and sit in traffic for the next 20 minutes because that's going to actually have other negative impacts back in South Boston in the transitway tunnel in the Seaport. So, much like what happens with the Green Line downtown, if you ever ride that, where sometimes trolleys are short-turned to try to keep the whole system on schedule, what we could do is, we could have an announcement at Airport Station letting people know the bridge is up and that this is going to be the end of the line on this trip, and then turn that Silver Line back to South Boston. On the Chelsea side of the river, there's operationally we could come off of either the busway or on-street alignments and do what a lot of traffic does, which is head back up to try to get on Route 1A closer to Bell Circle to make the trip down in. So that takes you out of the way, but that might be quicker than waiting for the full bridge cycle. And another thing we can do with our stations is with good customer information. If we're able to notify customers that the bridge is open, somebody who was kind of on the fence about, should I take the 111, should I take the Silver Line? I think I'll take the Silver Line. If you get over there and there's a notice that's letting you know that service is going to be delayed because the bridge is open, it gives you the option to walk back up to Broadway or Washington Ave and take a different service. So that's how we hope to deal with the bridge issue. Again, this is just showing that this is a new service. It wouldn't be extending the airport service. We have a Silver Line branch that comes from South Station and serves the airport terminals. This would be a new route altogether that would serve Chelsea and East Boston. The last couple slides here. Service frequency. This is a service that we've kind of modeled frequencies based on what the Logan Airport Silver Line does, which is service every 10 minutes during the peak, a little bit, or during weekdays, and then a little bit less frequent in the evenings or on weekends. So that's one service plan we might model. We also could model a service plan that's a little bit more frequent and comes every 7 or 8 minutes during the peak as opposed to every 10. But whichever service plan we choose, we want to model all of our alternatives against the same set of assumptions as far as how frequent the service would be. And then this is just kind of a laundry list of some of the other things we need to consider as we go forward. What's how big are the vehicles going to be? How important is it that the bus is doing the same thing on the inbound trip that it's doing on the outbound trip? Sometimes that can be confusing. Anyone who's taken the 112 knows that can be kind of confusing sometimes. Intermodal connections, how important is it to have this kind of tie-in with the commuter rail station? And then, I don't think it's going to be I don't see it as a concern, but we also need to be mindful of the capacity constraints in the South Boston Transitway Tunnel. We've got a lot of spare capacity today, but if this service becomes a higher frequency service, we have to start thinking about whether the tunnel itself can handle the traffic. And that's basically it. This is what's coming up. We're really looking for your input tonight to let us know what you think of all those alternatives and options we presented, because we really need to get down to 3 sort of distinct alternatives that we can then run through our regional travel demand model, which will give us some really good projections for what the ridership looks like on each of these alternatives. What the demand is, what the air quality impacts are from maybe pulling people out of cars to use the service, what the travel times look like. So we're really looking for your input to help inform that decision making, and then we'll be back here in mid to late June to present the results of that analysis. So that's it. Yeah. So happy to take any questions you have, and then again really encourage you to kind of weigh in and let us know which of those alternatives you like or don't like. Any opinions, questions? Sir?
Yeah, they have ship tracking software so that you can smartly.
Yeah.
And also, is it 20 minutes up and 20 minutes down? 13 to go up and 13 to go down, or is it?
I think the closure is the closure again based on I think the last month's worth of data. On average, the bridge would be out of service for about 13 to 14 minutes. 13 to 14 minutes. Sorry.
The ship goes through.
Yeah.
And it comes down.
Yeah. Yeah. Sir?
The red light when it goes on, when you get the green light to pass, and analyze the difference between a tanker ship and just a tugboat. Also, look at the Meridian Street, which is a double draw, and see how fast that operates.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
What I suggest is to find out if the ship traffic, the tanker traffic, and the ship traffic during morning rush will be halted.
yeah. I mean, so the ship traffic and someone who knows more about the sort of the rules. Yeah, the ships have the right of way through here. So.
How come the tanker, when they put the natural gas tanker comes in, all ship traffic stops? Well, ship traffic doesn't have the right of way.
Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. But yeah, 13 that 13 to 14 minutes. That's an average. So certainly if it's a small ship. Yeah.
I timed it because I was trying to get someone to the airport, and I got stuck.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and it's something we're going to have to try to work to address. However we can, however best we can. Any other comments or suggestions or opinions? Okay. Sir.
Mr. Pucko, can I have you just come up here if you have questions so everybody in the audience can hear the questions and also people at home can hear the questions?
Bellingham Square is where all the bus traffic comes and goes. You have to service Bellingham Square, no matter what you do in all of these plans. Not look at the other alternatives that kind of bypasses Bellingham Square and makes the people from Bellingham Square walk to this service.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think that was really what drove our decision to look at having a loop that came out of the busway and serve Bellingham Square. Another thing that I didn't mention already is that if we're having a station at the commuter rail station, anybody who's been there knows that that's not up to typical MBTA standards for what commuter rail stations are supposed to look like. If we touch that station by extending Silver Line through here, it'll likely trigger us to have to do a much more thorough rebuild of that station. And I know it's not the same as serving Bellingham Square, but if there's an option to maybe have some kind of pedestrian connection up to Washington Avenue from the station, that at least provides a little bit more of a visual connection between Bellingham Square and the station. But I appreciate the comment. Right. So that's really what we're going to use the model to help us, determine what the travel time differential is between various alternatives and what the impact that has on ridership. So, yeah. Right. Yeah. Certainly, you would think that being in the dedicated right-of-way, it's going to allow the service to operate a little bit more quickly and more reliably than it would on street. Counselor? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. If we could just ask folks to come up to the podium if they have questions, that'd be great.
Hi, thanks for being here, everybody. I just want to mention that I think you left out a couple of major developments that we have in the city that need to be serviced, and one is Admiral's Hill, and the other being the area that we have, it's called Parkway Commons in the Home Depot area, and we have a lot of people living there, and I think that we need to think about how we service not only our businesses, but our most congested areas there, like the IRS building now, and if the FBI building comes, and our hotel area. So if we could make stops somewhere where even if the people could walk there from to the 6th Street stop, but you're not considering the Home Depot area at all. I haven't heard that mentioned.
Right, that's right. I think for FBI and IRS and the hotels, I think, certainly the busway alternatives we looked at would serve those locations very well.
Correct, yeah.
Parkway Commons, I think that's really sort of outside of the study area that we're looking at. We have to be, we want to avoid extending the service too much through the local street network, because that has a negative impact on how reliable the service is going to be. It makes travel times longer, which means we need even more vehicles to run, a 10-minute headway. So we've really tried to focus this on serving what's clearly the biggest population center, which is downtown Chelsea and the neighborhoods around it, and then, what's clearly the biggest employment center, which is, some of the areas you just described, Councilor.
Okay, the other thing, I talked to a couple of people, and they wanted to make sure that you kept the integrity of the rail bed, if you use that, the one behind the box district, with deciduous trees, and make sure that it's kept the way it is, as much as possible. We don't just knock down trees and put down tar and pebbles, and, we don't want it looking too industrial. And the card that I saw that was sent to everybody, I got objections for the way this looks. Now, I know this will probably be the way it will have to look if it goes down Central and if it has to go down Bellingham Square. But if it goes down that area, I think we can use a buffer and we can make it look more pleasant, especially for the people who live in the box district and along the circumference of that area.
Yeah, I think certainly with the busway alternative, we'd be looking for every opportunity to have a nice landscaped, edge and buffer to that facility. That being said, oftentimes you do need to sort of clear out some of the vegetation that's already there in order to do the project. But certainly, if there were opportunities to preserve what's there currently, we'd look to do that. And we'd certainly commit to trying to have this be a nice landscaped edge, as provided that there's enough width to do that. And we think there likely is in the area you're talking about.
And the other thing I was thinking, I think we need to build a parking garage somewhere off Eastern Avenue. Like there is a spot that has near Global. There is a spot we can go up, and then I think there's a couple of other vacant spots. I'm sure you could talk to Jay about it, that it'd be reasonable to put a garage that's at least 4 stories high somewhere near the stop. I think that will help.
Yeah, well, certainly if you think about the cost of parking in downtown Boston, or increasingly the cost of parking in the Seaport district, or the airport for that matter, I mean, certainly you could envision a demand for a park and ride, somewhere along this corridor, and maybe Eastern Avenue is the right location for that. I would say that at this point we haven't thought thus far about incorporating a significant parking element into sort of the study. That might be a conversation that we have a little bit further down the line once we know what alternative that is moving
Yeah, I know
forward.
it's mostly thought of as a way that people could walk to the transport, but I think there might be a lot of people that drive there and would leave their vehicle there. So I'd like to think of that.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay?
Counselor.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yep, Counselor?
I just have one comment. A bunch of us go on the bus, the 116, 117. So we go over the bridge, Meridian Street Bridge. It's waiting either for a bus or on the bus. It's anywhere between 5 minutes and 40 minutes. So I'm glad that some people are averaging, but averaging doesn't really work, especially when you're on that bus.
Thank you. Yep. Counselor?
Yeah, I know the demand is we're trying to take care of all residents using the services of the bus lines, but I'm really concerned about the Silver Line coming through Bellingham Square. You said like 44 or 48 parking spaces will be removed, and there's local businesses there that may lose a lot of business from that happening. Plus, there's a lot of congestion now coming in through the square now with the buses and the cars and the taxi cabs there, and I don't know if there's another route that we can take to kind of eliminate the traffic pattern there. I mean, it's congested now as it is. Do we know how much the fare is going to be on the Silver Line?
Yeah, so the fare today, if you're using the Silver Line in South Boston or South Station, is equivalent to the subway fare. So it's a $2 fare. So that would be the same fare for the service. Would be a $2 fare, based on current.
And how many people do they project to be using the Silver Line once it comes through?
Again, Counselor, that's really the point of tonight's meeting. We need to identify 3 alternatives that we'll then model, with the regional travel demand model, and that's where we get answers to some of those questions about what the demand is. Yeah.
And somewhere down the line, when the Silver Line does come through, if it does come through, is there a possibility, say there's 5,000, 10,000 people using the Silver Line, and all of a sudden it drops down to, say, 1,000 people? Will the Silver Line be cutting services and raising fares to keep it afloat?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to kind of project too far in the future. Certainly, everybody knows that we've, the MBTA's had a challenge over the past few years with a significant operating budget. So far, we've been able to avoid, significant service cuts. There have been some. We obviously had to increase fares quite substantially, a year ago. But it's really too soon to say. We obviously have the legislature working right now on a transportation revenue solution. So depending on the scale of that solution, that'll probably give us some idea of how soon or how frequently we might have to deal with these kind of ongoing deficits. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. Yes, sir. If I could just ask you to come up for the mic.
Is there one option that you're leaning toward right now more so than the other as far as what the T is proposing?
Well, I think we have the luxury of advancing 3 alternatives right now. So I think obviously an on-street alternative has less capital expense than the busway alternative does. So to the extent that there's a possibility that we may be ready to move forward but don't have the capital funds available in the near term, I think it would be interesting to at least look at a busway alternative and an on-street alternative. but then we get one more, alternative to look at. So, do we want to look at, do we want to have two busway alternatives with one going to Mystic Mall and one trying to leave the busway and serve Bellingham Square? Do we want to look at, two different on-street alternatives, one of which just goes to the square, another one that tries to make its way over to Mystic Mall? That's really what we're looking for this group to give us some feedback on. I would just say that I feel like MassDOT would like to look at least one on-street alternative and one busway alternative.
So this would be a good time to chime in and just let people know where I am on this. So I think for this service to be most beneficial to the residents of Chelsea, it needs to be quick. For those of us who have taken the 111 or the 116, or I think some of you are still on the 112, the service takes forever, and we get frustrated going into Boston or coming back at all the stops and delays. I am first very concerned about using the local city streets because of the time it takes to get through those city streets, and especially during rush hours. The congestion is just so bad that this rapid transit service will turn into turtle transit service. It won't be rapid enough to really make an alternative and have the maximum impact. So while we haven't ruled out anything and appreciate MassDOT looking at all the alternatives, I can answer that my preferred route is the quicker route. It's along the rail bed behind the box district and terminating somewhere beyond the commuter rail station. I don't have a preference right now in terms of going on around the MGH building or going into the Mystic Mall. Mr. Pucko is absolutely right. Bellingham Square has been important to all of us for as many years as we've been here. My concern again is if we bring the bus into Bellingham Square, that we're going to get bogged down, and that bogged down is not really good for this service. So that's the perspective that we're operating under right now, and certainly haven't made up our mind yet, but wanted to let you know where we're leaning relative to that, and are hopeful that to the extent that any of you here or anyone who's watching at home has a concern about that you'd let us know. My second concern is that the number one concern I hear from residents of the city whenever we go to community meetings is the lack of parking that's available in neighborhoods. It is the number one concern every time we talk to people. And so to take away parking would be a very difficult thing to do. Now, we could certainly argue that there's a huge public benefit by adding this service, and the huge public benefit outweighs the public cost of removing parking. But I'm very concerned about the idea that we would remove parking, and I agree with Councilor Perlatonda that, especially when we're talking about the business community, the parking options are of a grave concern as well. In addition, and you were going in this direction, in addition, when you remove the parking and the bus isn't there, you create more open areas where people will tend to speed, and I'm concerned about the public safety impact of speeding. The answer to your question about speed bumps is that we have installed some traffic calming bumps, tables and speed bumps in a couple of areas. On Grove Street, currently we've installed a bump and a table. A table is a longer bump. Would that be fair to say, Scott?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure. I'm not a planner. I just play one. And when we finish repaving Washington Avenue, because we had a concern that there was going to be speeding on now a very smooth Washington Avenue roadway, we have two areas, one at Spruce Street and one at Crescent, where we are also doing the speed table. And the speed table raises the level of the intersection, gives the motorist who's going fast the impression that they need to slow down or else they're going to do something to their car. So we are starting to experiment with how to use these devices and others to slow traffic down. But getting back to Central Ave, even with cars parked there, people tend to pick up speed on Central Ave because there aren't a lot of other cars driving on that. I can only imagine if we eliminate parking on Central Ave, how much faster the public will travel there. So that's another reason why I'm concerned about that. I have a question. If you can go back to the slide that has the quarter mile radius numbers. So a question has come up from some people who Councilor Barton was hoping that we might be able to help service, and those are people who live in the Spencer Lofts and down at Parkside Commons, about connections. And this is especially about thinking about the quarter-mile radius. Although there may be a quarter-mile radius that includes more residents, the difficulty for some of those people in the quarter-mile radius to get to, let's say, the Box District or to the commuter rail station is substantial. So it's not a straight path. There is heavy major industrial users, including the MWRA, who would block any direct connections. So while it may be within a quarter-mile radius, when you draw the circle, the walk may actually be bigger, and I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
We actually, initially we hadn't, but then we went back and looked at it and realized that we were counting a lot of folks that were across Crescent Ave. So we did constrain that quarter-mile walk radius to just cover the ground you could actually cover on foot in a quarter mile. And you still do get you get a lot of that. You're still able from the Box District station to access a good number of a good way up Broadway and then some of the side streets there. But you're right, you did lose some of that, heading over towards Spencer Ave and on the across Crescent.
Thank you for doing that.
And just and on the on the parking issue too, I think that we certainly recognize that that's a pretty significant change in how the streets would function, at Hawthorn and at the end of Central, and we certainly recognize that. But I think, as part of this project, we're really looking to create a service that's going to be a reliable service that's going to, make people want to maybe hop out of the car and take the Silver Line. So we think it's really important, if we're evaluating on-street alternatives, not to do the nuclear option that we talked about by taking all the parking on Central, but targeting places where we know there's a lot of congestion, but we know there's a lot of bus passengers. If you think about the number of people that are passing down that block of Hawthorn inside of 111 or inside of 116 or 117, there might be as many people on those buses as there are in the cars. So, we think that might be a reasonable place, when you add Silver Line service as well, that might be a reasonable place to say, hey, we might actually improve the experience here for the most people if we dedicated a lane. So the last thing I'll say on parking is the team is doing a parking inventory and analysis. I don't know if either of the team members want to talk about what that's going to entail and how that's going to help us maybe, understand the impacts of some of these changes. Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. So you may have seen us doing our inventories, wearing our safety vests on the streets, looking at parking spaces, and that's what some of that information's been in the presentation. What we'll also look at as occupancy of parking on the street at different times on the roadway. So we know how many spaces. We want to find out how many folks are parked in those spaces at different times of the day, so we know what the impact would be really on parking demand. So it gives us an idea of not only the spaces eliminated, but how many people would actually be displaced who need to park in those areas. So essentially that's what we look at, both the supply, number of spaces, and we look at demand. So we'll be doing a survey in limited areas on Central Avenue and Hawthorn to look at what the demand will be, how that'll be impacted by some of these alternatives.
So a couple other questions or points. Do you have any estimates now on trip time? And a challenge that we have as a community is to figure out speed versus convenience, but we don't really know what the speed is versus the getting the convenience. So have you done anything on that yet?
So again, that's once we've identified the three alternatives that'll advance, then we'll start estimating what travel speeds might be on certain segments of those corridors, and that'll all get fed into the regional travel demand model, and we'll get some hopefully reliable estimates that we can report back in June. But we're not quite there yet.
And nothing back of the envelope that we think it's going to be 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes more?
Well, we certainly think that, if you just even look at the number of stations that we're proposing compared to, say, the 116, 117, the frequency of bus stops on that route, I mean, certainly for someone who could access the Silver Line in Chelsea, it would seem to be pretty clear that this would be the quicker way to get to the Blue Line if your goal was just to kind of connect to the Blue Line, like a lot of people are doing on the 116, 117. There's no doubt that this would be a much quicker way to get to the Seaport than any other alternative that folks in Chelsea have today. So I think we can say that with certainty, but I wouldn't want to guess on travel time.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
A comment that I will make is that we also do believe that trying to get a connection with the existing public transportation options that exist in Chelsea is important. So we will continue to prioritize that, and looking at station placements that will allow people who are on the 111 or the 116 and 117 to have an easier access if they want to make that transfer is something that's a priority to us. My last question is, do you have a ballpark at all about cost?
You know, a couple years ago, CTPS had done sort of a very high-level analysis of this project. I don't want to necessarily throw a number out from that analysis because it wasn't so rigorous, but the busway alternative was in sort of the tens of millions. So this isn't a Green Line extension scale of a project or a South Coast Rail. We're not talking about a kind of $1 billion price tag. This is something that is likely to be south of $100 million. But again, that's another question. Once we've got a smaller number of alternatives, the team can start crunching the numbers, running the numbers on that.
And that is
That's
capital costs and not the annual operating costs.
Yeah, so that would be the busway alternative. The on-street alternative was a very modest expense. It was in the tens of thousands because you were really just building these high-end bus stops, but they weren't, there wasn't a lot of capital work associated with it. Obviously we've talked about the vehicle constraint in the past, and that doesn't include that doesn't include the procurement of new vehicles. So that depending on whether or not this project would be expected to shoulder that cost, that's another cost to consider, and it doesn't take into account any of the operating costs, assuming this is in addition to the MBTA's current family of services and its new service. There'd be an operating cost impact as well.
Great.
So stay tuned for June. I think we'll have a lot more answers for you then, Jay.
The last thing I wanted to say is that I did have an opportunity to check in with each of our legislators today. They were off at other functions as well, and they just wanted me to remind everybody that they're in support of the concept as well and are working with us and with the state to address this. Last time we got together, I also talked about the transportation financing issue that was before the legislature and how important it is to raise additional revenues so that this project that's important to us in Chelsea and other public transportation projects throughout the Commonwealth can be funded. At the end of the day, tens of millions of dollars is inexpensive for a public transportation addition, and yet it has to come from someplace. And when you add up all of the good things that we want to do about public transportation around the Commonwealth, we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. Those dollars need to come someplace, and to the extent that you all are engaged in this, in the debate about how to finance these things, it's very important. So if you want a service like this, service in other communities that you may utilize to get to work, or your friends or relatives may use, it's important to let people know that you're willing to have a reasonable and rational discussion about how to pay for those things, and that the last people that should be paying for it are the people who are riding it. We need to raise the money because it services the entire Commonwealth, it services the business community, it services institutions. We need to raise the money through taxation so that we don't have to charge $10 or $12 or $15 for a bus ride, and we don't have, and the alternative, which is that we don't have the bus ride at all. So please stay engaged in that discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Councilor? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the councilor's question was: would this Silver Line service run on have the same span of service, provide service during the same hours of the day as the 111 and the other bus routes in the system? And yeah, we would envision this keeping the same hours as the rest of the high frequency service we run. So service up until about 1 in the morning, service starting between 5 and 5:30 in the morning. So yes, councilor. Well, yeah, it would definitely be a quick way to get over to the Blue Line, and like we were talking before, Councilor, I think the more we can give this service its own right of way, its own lane, its own dedicated right of way, the more it can function like rail service, like the Blue Line does, which obviously has its own right of way. Yeah, the question was, would this be beneficial to the city of Chelsea? And we certainly, yeah, that's why we're here. We certainly think that's the case. Yeah. Thank you. And I don't know, oh, sorry, miss. Yeah. So we'll definitely post the presentation online. So make sure you have the website. It was on the screen earlier. I can give you my card afterwards. So we'll have that online. I think what I'd like to do, since folks took the time to come out, maybe the best thing to do is maybe even take a show of hands to see, what people think of the various alternatives we looked at. Not drilling down to each kind of sub option, but I think, again, we're really talking about four general alternatives, right? I mean, we've got what I've got up on the screen here, which is, let's maximize the use of the Commonwealth-owned right-of-way and have something that's in the busway all the way from essentially Eastern Avenue over to Mystic Mall. That's kind of one option. Maybe we could take a show of hands to see who thinks that's a good idea for us to pursue. Okay, Nancy, are you? Yeah. All the way to the Mystic Mall, or well, we could have another conversation about whether it's turning at Everett Avenue. But this would be a service that would get, as Jay said, beyond the commuter rail station. So, okay, well that's another variation on there. Okay, so we seem to have some good. Yeah, right. Okay, so we've got good response there now. And then the other, I think, another big alternative that we need to decide whether to advance is, what if we said, let's not focus so much on these new development opportunities over in the Everett Avenue area. Let's have this really just focus in on where existing transit demand is today, and that was this alternative we looked at that had the busway, had the Silver Line come out of the busway and onto that little one-block section of Chestnut Street over here by the fire station, and then serve Bellingham Square before turning back. So this would be, Silver Line to Bellingham Square. Who thinks this should be one of the three things we look at? And you can vote more than once because we can look at up to three alternatives. Okay, great. Okay. It seems like that one's not exciting people as much as the first alternative. Okay. And then we looked at on-street alternatives. So again, the way we've defined this basic on-street alternative is we want to make some accommodations for buses at either end of Central Avenue to allow the buses to kind of jump ahead of the congestion that you experience at either end. We also want to try to carve out some space for buses on Hawthorn Avenue, given the very high number of passengers that are passing through this block, particularly when you look at all the other buses that we have out there. And then also having a dedicated lane on Washington Avenue. And this would be service that would just, basically serve Bellingham Square and loop back and head out on Central Avenue back towards East Boston. So who thinks looking at an on-street alternative like this makes sense? Okay. Okay, again, even fewer hands for that one. Okay. And then...
What's the overall size of these buses? Overall length?
So the ones we operate today in the Silver Line Tunnel in South Boston are 60 feet long. They're articulated, so the buses that bend in the middle. And we could certainly. I think we're assuming that we'd be using a vehicle like that, but certainly we could operate 40-foot buses on this corridor, and that might be sufficient. If you think about it, that's what we operate on the 111, 116, 117. We probably could use bigger buses on those routes, but that's it's unlikely this service would. Yeah, I think a 40-footer would probably be, could be sufficient at least initially on this corridor as well. And then just the last alternative would be, basically just variations of that on-street alternative that tries to serve Bellingham Square, but then also continue on to the Mystic Mall, Everett Avenue area, via some fairly circuitous paths. So what's the feedback on that one? How many people are voting for that one? Okay, so we've got just a couple for that one. So I think, Nancy, it seemed like you might want to confirm this. It seemed like the first alternative was the one that got the best response. And second one was second. Okay, so I think what we'll do, and we'll talk more internally as a team and with the city, but I think it's pretty clear that folks are interested in the busway concept. So I think what I would imagine we'll do is maybe model 2 of those, and then maybe just one on-street alternative. But we'll obviously need to continue coordinating with Jay and have some more discussions with the team. But that's kind of I feel like that's what the feedback I got is. So if there's no big change, that we'll be back in a month and a half or so to kind of report back on what the projections for those types of services look like. Anything else? Yep. Oh, okay. The question was about the bridges. Yeah, so we can't, the shipping traffic has preference through these corridors, so there's nothing we can do about that. The bridge has been built and it operates the way it does, so there's nothing we can really do about that. But yeah, I think it would be in a more real-time basis. I don't think we'd get a lot of advance notice, but the bridge will now be under MassDOT kind of operation. We hope that there's a way that we can coordinate between the T and bridge operations to at least provide MBTA bus operations with a little bit of notice that, hey, the bridge is going to be going up in a couple minutes, so that an outbound bus doesn't pull away from Airport Station and then find out that the bridge is open and then get stuck in traffic. Oh, for like the one, yeah. Yeah. Right, yeah, so the 116, you're talking about like the 116, 117 with yeah, right. Yeah, no, I mean, this would be, I think we'd sort of be modeling that approach and if it worked, if it worked here, and it's something that's worth considering, even if it's something that it's worth talking more about, even if it's not a part of this project, because it does have a big impact. I don't know if you were the one who had talked about how the 116, 117, you might have a 5-minute wait, then a 40-minute wait. A lot of that is caused by just delays from the bridge. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, make no mistake about it. I mean, I think that the two things that are going to be out of our hands with this project are the bridge will be sort of out of our hands, and we'll try to manage that the best we can, and then the Ted Williams Tunnel. I mean, at times when that tunnel is backed up, there's nothing that the existing Silver Line service can do to get around it. We'll be limited in what we can do, but we are trying, to the extent we can, everywhere else in the corridor to try to provide the bus with as much advantage or accommodation as we can. Okay. Well, if there's no other, sir. Yeah.
You had a graph showing estimated job growth.
Oh, at the last meeting, right?
Can you explain where you got that info?
Yeah. So that.
Can you show that again? Could you go over that again?
We may have it in the.
It's not in the.
Oh, we don't. Okay.
It's on the computer.
But that was MAPs. Do you want to speak to that, Jay? Here you go, Jay.
Sure. The slide, one of the earlier slides that Scott had shown was the existing population and employment in and around the potential station areas. But yes, going back to the slides that were presented at the prior meeting, they provided not just the existing 2010 population and employment, but also the 2035 projected population and employment. That data is available. It's part of the PowerPoint presentation that was given at the March 13th meeting, which is on the project website. So you can access that slide and look at it online.
Do you have any information to share with, do you see projects coming that support that growth, or is it all residential?
It's Jay?
Just to be clear, are you talking about employment growth here in Chelsea or along the entire corridor?
No, just in Chelsea.
Yeah,
At the very end, there was a big circle.
Right,
Of
right.
the high school.
Right, yes. The information that was presented at the March 13th meeting breaks down the growth in population and employment by jurisdiction. It shows the Chelsea, it shows East Boston, and it shows the Seaport. So you can get the numbers, both existing and 2035, for each of those three geographic areas by going to the project website and downloading the presentation that was given on March 13th. It has all that information in it. Yep.
I don't know whether that answered my question. I'm sort of looking for, do you think the hotels are going to be using this?
Okay, yeah. If you're looking for sort of a recap of what does that data show, what it shows is good growth in the corridor. This is a high growth, both residential and jobs. This is a high growth corridor. So when we look at the corridor in its totality, from Chelsea through East Boston and the Seaport, where we really see the most growth is in Chelsea and the Seaport. Not so much growth in East Boston, but certainly good amount of growth in Chelsea and the Seaport. And so connecting the two with this type of service is really connecting people to jobs in a very big way.
And just to add to that too, just in case there was confusion at the last meeting, those job projections were not, not necessarily associated with this project. Those were projections that MAPC has already kind of identified as what they expect to happen over the next 20 years. We certainly believe that a project like this could generate economic development by itself, but those projections that we presented last meeting were purely part of our kind of regional land use planning process and not specific to this project. All right. Last call. Anyone else? All right. Thanks.